At dawn, as mist curls around broken columns, and the Tiber flows as it always has, Rome feels eternal. That illusion is where our story begins. The Roman Empire rose by convincing the world its power was natural, inevitable, and ordained. As we glide from myth to marble, from shepherd legends to iron legions, we see how a small settlement learned to absorb neighbors, rewrite victories as destiny, and transform survival into expansion. It created a narrative so powerful that even its enemies adopted it, believing Rome wasn't merely a city, but an idea too vast to resist. Ancient legends tell of Rome's birth and blood, and omen twins raised by a wolf, kings expelled for tyranny, and a republic sworn to shared rule. Yet, archaeology reveals a harsher reality. Early Rome expanded through calculated violence, strategic alliances, and relentless adaptation. Ancient maps chart roads, pushing outward like veins, binding conquered peoples to the capital. Lost civilizations disappeared beneath Roman stone, their temples repurposed, their gods renamed, and their histories absorbed. This ensured that Rome's rise looked like unity, not domination, and resistance faded into footnotes beneath triumphal arches. As the Republic transformed into an empire, power centralized around individuals who mastered spectacle, law, and fear. Forbidden texts whisper of purges and political murders that official histories softened. Emperors framed absolute control as stability. Even the climate played its part. Favorable weather and fertile provinces fed armies and cities alike, allowing Rome to grow beyond sustainable limits. Archaeology now uncovers grain routes, aqueducts, and mines stretched to exhaustion, revealing that expansion was never endless, only temporarily balanced by fortunate conditions and disciplined extraction. Roman dominance relied on information as much as steel. Ancient maps were tools of control, defining borders Rome claimed even when it couldn't fully defend them. Records were curated to emphasize order and minimize chaos. As provinces strained under taxation and conscription, dissent was labeled barbarism, not grievance, making rebellion seem irrational. Modern technology now reconstructs these networks, exposing how tightly coupled systems magnified both success and risk. Rome was powerful, precisely because it was vulnerable to disruption. As we end this chapter, Rome stands at its height, confident, monumental, and admired. Yet, we can already see the cracks forming in overstretched frontiers and silenced critics. The same mechanisms that built the empire also constrained it. Understanding Rome's rise means recognizing that its fall was already encoded within its success, waiting for pressure, change, and time to reveal the truth. Did you know the fall of Rome wasn't just about barbarians at the gates? It was a much slower, more complex unraveling. And the truth is way more fascinating than the myths. Power in Rome started to crumble from the inside. Imagine an empire where emperors were rising and falling so fast it would make your head spin. Why? Because loyalty wasn't earned, it was bought. Legions were literally auctioning off the throne to the highest bidder. While official records tried to paint a picture of orderly succession, secret texts tell a different story, one of palace coups and poisoned heirs. At the same time, a silent enemy was creeping in. Climate change. A cooling trend meant shorter harvests, leading to food shortages. Plagues swept through the population, thinning out cities and farms. Archaeologists have found emergency walls built around towns and abandoned luxury villas, clear signs that even the wealthy were losing faith in Rome's eternal power. As the core weakened, the edges began to fray. Provinces weren't just lost to invasion, they were lost to neglect. Roads fell into disrepair, borders were left unguarded, and local leaders started to go their own way. Back in the capital, the bureaucrats insisted everything was fine. Admitting weakness was a threat to the myth of an all-powerful Rome. But this denial was deadly. Modern analysis shows that crucial information about crises arrived months too late, crippling any effective response. The empire was built for giving orders, not for adapting to change. Then, the climate shocks got worse. Severe droughts cut off grain shipments from Africa, the empire's breadbasket. Floods wiped out critical infrastructure, and those famous Roman trade routes, they became superhighways for pandemics. Mass graves and shrinking cities tell us a story of demographic collapse that the official histories glossed over. To fund the military, emperors raised taxes and devalued the currency. which just sparked runaway inflation and destroyed public trust. Thanks to modern technology, we can now see how all these problems were connected. Satellite surveys show a mass exodus from cities back to the countryside. Isotope analysis of human remains reveals widespread malnutrition, affecting everyone from the poor to the elite. For centuries, people blamed Rome's fall on moral decay. But the evidence points to a system overloaded and unable to cope. It wasn't a single event, but a long, slow unwinding. The refusal to adapt and change proved far more dangerous than any invading army. This wasn't just an end, but a transformation. Join us next time as we explore what rose from the ashes and how the idea of Rome managed to outlive the empire itself. For centuries, we've pictured the fall of Rome as a sudden, catastrophic event. A night of fire and chaos. But what if the real story is something quieter and far more relevant to us today? In its final centuries, Rome learned a hard lesson. Endurance isn't the same as survival. Authority can exist on paper long after it is dissolved in the real world. Archaeology gives us a fascinating glimpse into this slow decline. We see once thriving cities shrinking within their own walls. Grand public forums, the heart of civic life, were repurposed as simple markets. Imperial statues weren't always toppled in rebellion, but simply reused out of indifference. Ancient maps still showed provinces with Roman names, places Rome no longer governed, preserving a powerful illusion of control. Meanwhile, hidden texts reveal desperate pleas from officials on the frontier, begging for resources that would never arrive. The empire's machinery had grown too slow, too vast. The center no longer understood the edges it claimed to rule. As the climate changed and new peoples migrated across the landscape, Rome's famous borders became less like solid walls and more like zones of negotiation. So-called invaders often entered not as conquerors, but as settlers, soldiers, or even administrators, filling the gaps that Rome itself could no longer manage. We see a continuity beneath the conquest. Roman roads were maintained, its laws adapted, and its identity was diluted rather than destroyed. The political narrative of a sudden fall was crafted later, suppressing the reality that for many communities, this was a transition, not an apocalypse. The empire's end wasn't a single event, but a long, slow acceptance that Rome could no longer be everywhere at once. Today, modern technology allows us to see this transformation with incredible clarity. Satellite imagery traces shifting settlement patterns. Climate data aligns perfectly with periods of economic contraction. Digital reconstructions show how infrastructure decayed because of administrative withdrawal, not because of invasion. Historians are now challenging those old, moral explanations for the fall, replacing tales of decadence with hard evidence of systemic overload. Yet, the old story lingers because it's politically useful. It is easier to use Rome's fall as a simple warning than to grapple with the complex realities of an overstretched system. So what actually survived Rome? Not its emperors, but its systems, its laws, its roads, its calendar, and its powerful belief in order imposed from above. The kingdoms that followed borrowed Rome's legitimacy to prop up their own, quietly discarding the responsibilities Rome could no longer enforce. And in our collective memory, emperors were transformed into simple archetypes heroes, or villains masking the real, structural causes of failure. It's always easier to blame a person than to confront the limits of expansion and control. Rome became a mirror, reflecting both the aspirations and the warnings for every empire that followed. As we look at these ancient ruins, it's clear Rome didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it was certain that its systems were permanent, its authority was universal, and its future was guaranteed. As our own world faces similar pressures of scale, climate, and control, Rome's story doesn't feel so distant. It waits in the present, asking if we can recognize the moment when endurance becomes denial. And it poses a final, haunting question. Does an empire only truly fade when no one is left to believe in it? Thanks for watching. If you found this perspective on history interesting, consider subscribing for more.